Hi everyone. Today's lesson is about how do we incorporate an ASP.NET Core application with Entity Framework. And for the database, we're going to be using the sample Northwind database. So let's get started. I'm going to create a folder and I'm going to call it Entity Framework Core MVC, and we're going to go into a command prompt in this particular folder, and I will execute this command, and this command is going to produce for me a new MVC app using individual authentication, and I want to use local DB, which is the simplified version of SQL Server. If I don't do this, it's going to create for me an app using SQLite. But because I want to access a Northwind database, I definitely need all the drivers for SQL Server. So this is what we get. Now, in order to reverse engineer my Northwind database, I need to run this command here, and with this command I need to enter the username for the database, the password for the database, and I'm going to make a small change here. I want the output for the classes that are going to be created to be models/Northwind. So I'm going to take this, copy it, paste it in here, and enter the username and password. So once you enter the new username and password, then the command that does the reverse engineering, it would produce for us the classes that represent the artifacts in the database. So let's see it. Let's go into Visual Studio Code. And have a look. So under models, sure enough, the database has been reverse engineered for us. Now, let us look at a few things. These are the categories. And then we've got our customers, our employees, our order details, and so on and so forth. It is very easy for us to reverse engineer, but how about making use of these classes in controllers and in views? In other words, let us try and use these database artifacts in an ASP.NET app. If you're using Visual Studio 2017, it is probably much easier, because in Visual Studio 2017, there is the capacity to scaffold the controllers using the tool. So let us go to Visual Studio 2017 and you'll see how easy it is. So I'm going to close Visual Studio Code and go into Visual Studio 2017. And the way to do that is perhaps just call the csproj file, and it will automatically load the app in Visual Studio 2017. Now, let's go back and have a look at our context class. And you will notice that in our context class, which is this class here, if we open it, there will be this warning that it is a bad idea to put your connection string hard-coded in your source code. So how do we solve this problem? To solve this problem, we need to put our connection string inside of this app settings.json. In fact, there is already a connection string here. And this connection string is the one that was created by our template, and its sole purpose is to provide us with individual database authentication. So this is a connection string that they already put for us. Now what I normally do is, because I don't like the name of this database, it's too long and it's very ugly, so I come here and I give it a more sensible name. And I would give it the name of my application, EF Core MVC. I will also come here, copy, paste this, and rename this to Northwind DB. This is just an arbitrary name. This is the database connection string name that I want to have for my database. And I will copy and paste the connection string that I used when I reverse engineered the database. I'm going to paste it here. At this point, I pasted the connection string to my database. Now, let's do something else. If you look into the configure services method, you will notice that there is this line of code here that essentially creates a singleton class that is used with dependency injection, so that this context class becomes available to us in any other class where we might want to use it. Now, this only pertains to the application DB context. But we have another context class called the Northwind context. And we want to make that also available for dependency injection. So I would copy this whole thing here and repurpose it so that we can use it with the Northwind context. So I'm going to replace this by Northwind context. And this, of course, needs to be resolved. And for the connection string name, I have to use this name here that I put in the app settings. So I'm going to take that and put it here. So this is essentially going to make available this Northwind context to the rest of my application, and so I can use it in any class. And this is what dependency injection is. Now, there is one place where I want to use it. In fact, in here, I want to access this connection string. But what I want to access is not so much this. What I want to access is the environment. And the environment can be accessed using this configuration object. And this will show you how I can use dependency injection to get hold of this object, which will allow me to get a handle to the connection string in the app settings. So if we go now to the Northwind context, I can create an instance variable here at the very top, and I'll call that iConfiguration. And I'll just call it _config. And let me resolve this. In this constructor, so I'm going to say comma iConfiguration config. And this is where I'm going to assign this local config object to the one that's being passed in the constructor. This is what we call dependency injection. Now from here, I should take this object, come down here, So at this point, we're going to delete the connection string and replace it with the local variable config, and we can target the key that we have for the connection string in this file. So this is going to read the configuration from the app settings and pop it in here. That way, we have the connection string only in one place. Okay? And we can get rid of this warning. We don't need it anymore. We fixed this problem. Now, let's talk about the so-called scaffolding. Now, let us scaffold the controllers and the views for the category table. Now, let's have a peek at the category entity here. If you look at the category entity, there are 4 columns in that table. The first column is the ID, second one is category name, then description, then picture. I'm going to be using the categories table because it is simple and it doesn't have a lot of data. So it's easy for demonstration purposes. But this last column, which is the picture, I'm going to totally ignore because it's not necessary for us to deal with pictures at this stage. Now that we've seen what it looks like, let us go back to the controllers folder, right click, and go add controller. You get this that shows up. If you look at this particular type of template, it says MVC controller with views using entity framework. Now we do have an entity framework model here. So if we use this, it will do some good work for us. It's going to create for us the controller and the views automatically. And this is one of the benefits of using Visual Studio. So I'm going to choose this and go add. It will ask me for the model class, and I'm going to choose categories here. It can find it in its environment. For the context class, notice that there are 2 context classes. This is the context class that's used by Identity Framework, and this is the context class that's being used for Northwind. And these are totally 2 different databases. One database exists locally, and the other database is actually remote on a server. They don't share anything in common. So for this purpose, because I want to interact with Northwind, I'm going to choose this and click on Add. Here it's asking me to save a solution. I'm just going to say Save. So now it's doing the scaffolding. What's happening behind the scenes is that it's going to create for me a controller called Categories Controller, and it's going to create for me views. And here they go. If you look down here, you see a Categories Controller. And if you look under Views, there is a folder called Categories, and it's got all these views. It's got an index, create, edit, details, and delete. If you look at the categories controller, you will notice that because we made the Northwind context injectable, when we modified the code in startup, it can actually use this as an injectable singleton. And this is dependency injection, just like what we did with the configuration. And this is so that this object becomes available to us in all the methods. Let us make a menu item in our application so that we can click on it and it will take us to the categories controller. So I'm going to go under Views, Shared, Layout, and then in here I'll repurpose this line, which is around line 35. And this is what pretty much creates a link on our main page. So the controller is called categories. The ASP action, which is really the action method, is the index. And let me show you what I mean. This is going to be the main default page. So that's index, and we want it just to display categories to the user. Let's run this. Here it is. If you click on categories, you're going to see some data coming in from the database. Now, this column is category name, this column is description, but then we have a picture column. And what you see here is essentially base 64 encoding of the picture. Let us go into the code and delete this. We don't want to see the picture. So where would you go? You have to follow the URL here. This is probably in the page index. Index. So let's go to index. If you look at index, there is this header that pertains to the picture. Let's delete that. And then this is the data that pertains to the picture. Let's delete that. And let's save. Because this is a change that's being done to the UI, you don't need to recompile it. So I'm going to come to my page and refresh. And you will see that it has done for us a pretty good job. It looks neat. Let us click on Create New. When you look at Create New, again we have a picture here. Let's delete that. Now this is probably in the create.cshtml, so let's go there to do this change. We are going to go to create.cshtml, and down here we have a block that pertains to the picture. Let's delete that, save, come here, refresh, and now let's add a new category. Let's add, say, fruit, and the description, let it say banana. Create. Here is our fruit, banana. Next, let's look at the details of our banana fruit. And again, we have a picture. So let's get rid of the picture. We go to details, and here we have a data list with a title and the definition pertaining to the picture. We can delete that, save, go back here, refresh, and it looks okay. Let's go back to list and look at edit. And sure enough, in the edit form, we have a picture. Let's delete that too. So that would be in edit.cshtml. And there is a block here to do with the picture. Let's delete that. Save, refresh. So let's change this to grapes and save. And sure enough, it changed it to grapes. So it seems to be doing its job. Finally, let's delete it. When you come to delete, again, we have a picture. So let's delete the picture here. So let's go to delete.cshtml. And again, we have a data title and data description for picture. We can delete that. And refresh. So now it looks like everything's working. Let me actually delete this, and sure enough, it's gone. let us understand the code that it created for us. Let's start with the controller. So we have this categories controller. And if you look at the methods that were created for us, these are the methods. To start with, you will notice that create come in pairs, delete action methods also come in pairs, and the edit action method also are in pairs. So why is it that we have two of these? Let's have a look. Let's start with the create action method. So there is this one create action method, and then this is the other create action method. There is one difference between these two. This action method is annotated with post, which means it responds to the post verb. This action method is not annotated with anything because the default verb is HTTP GET. So that's why they come in pairs. This action method is responsible for displaying the create form, and this one is the one that actually does the saving, or the one that inserts the new record. Because when the submit button is clicked on the form, it comes here, and this is where it actually saves. Look at the argument that's being passed. The argument that's being passed is a category object. Now, this piece here is so that you can control as a developer what are the properties that are being transferred from the form into the controller for saving purposes. If you have a table that has maybe 30 columns, you might not really want more than 3 or 4 columns to be transferred from the form to the controller. And this is where you control that. In our case, if I delete this, it will still work. But I'm not controlling what's coming through. Everything will come through. Let's prove that. Let's run this again. I have to compile because I made a change to the C#. And then let's run this. I'll refresh. Or remember that I actually changed some code in the create post method. So if I come here and add something like entrees, entree, and then I'll say steak, create, and it actually worked even though I deleted that code. Let's see what happens when you actually submit a new category. Model state is valid data. This checks that if you have any validation on the, if any of the validations fail, the record will not be saved. This is because you don't rely only on JavaScript. JavaScript can be disabled. You have to do validation at the back end too. This is where the record is being added to the context, and this is where it's being saved. And after it's being saved, we're doing a redirect to the index page. The edit behaves in a similar manner. This edit action method responds to the get verb. This is where the ID is being passed. Here we find the category with that ID, and then we pass it as a concrete class to the view. If the category is null, then we're going to send a 404 error to the user, which is not found. When the user submits an edited category, it would come here. We're going to check that the ID is indeed a category ID? Because mind you, there are two arguments that get passed here: the ID itself and the category object. So we want to check that the ID is indeed the category ID of the object. If not, we send a not found, which is an error 404. We also check that all our validations are okay. If everything's okay, we update the record in the database. If there's an exception, we're going to check whether the category does not exist. If it doesn't exist, then we're going to give a not found. Otherwise, we're going to throw an exception and redirect to the index page. The delete also works in a similar fashion. This one displays for you a form allowing you to confirm whether or not you're sure that you want to delete. And here you remove the object from the categories collection. Now, let us have a peek at how the create view looks like. If you go to the create view, it starts off with a form where you're going to specify the name of the action method in the controller that knows how to handle this. And in this case, it is the create action method. And if you don't specify a verb, it is assumed that it's going to use the post method to post to the controller. This is to display validation. And these are the different elements that are used for inputting data. Let's run this again. Create a new category, enter nothing, and click on create, and boom, it crashes. So we have a problem here. We have to make the category name and the description required. Where would you do that? In ASP.NET MVC core, validations are done with annotations. You don't need to sit down and do JavaScript kind of validations, because the validations that are annotated, they're translated by the engine into client-side validations. Let's see how that works. So if we want to apply validations to the category entity, we can come here to the category entity itself and add some validations. So here for the category name, I can say required. And this, of course, has to be resolved. And I can do the same thing for description. Let's compile. It's as simple as that. We go to our app now, go back, refresh, and click on create. We get validations. And there is a default error message. Suppose we're not happy with this error message. We can go back to the model, and where it says required, we can say error message equals to you must enter the, and the placeholder for this is index 0. Let us see what happens here. Let's go, refresh, click on here. You see, I actually changed the description. So you have always the ability to override the default error message. There is something else that I don't like. If you're putting this application into production, the title category name with no space between category and name doesn't look very user-friendly. So I might want to change the display name for the column. That's also very easy to do in the model. You can come here and say display name equals to, I might decide I just want it to be called category. And this will do it. Go here, refresh, and what do you know? We change the display name here to whatever it is you want. Because there's a distinction between the column name in the database and what you want your users to see. They don't have to be the same. How about we do something else? We want to have a minimum length for this thing. Category name, can it be 2 characters? Maybe, but I would say no. Maybe I'll say it has to be a minimum of 3 characters, for example. So you can have min length, and I can say min length is 3 characters. If I don't enter an error message, there is a default error message for this. And I can even have a max length. And I can say my max length is, say, 30 characters for our purposes. Let's refresh. Let's say I enter 2 characters here, and I go create. You see? The field category must be a string or array type with a minimum length of 3. So it has its default error message. How about if I do this? I'm going to repeat this 4 times, paste it 4 times, and obviously I'm exceeding the limit, and I didn't even click on create. This is JavaScript, so it's client-side, and even before I click the submit button, it actually displays for me this error message. Now, how does it do this? What's the magic, the underlying magic that happens here? To understand how that validation is done, we need to go and look at the page source. And you look at the page source, and if you look at the category name, first of all, the max length error message, here it is. The field category must be a string or array type with a minimum blah blah blah. And there's also one for the minimum length and the maximum length and all these things. Now, where is the JavaScript that's actually watching this? Mind you, these are all data dash attributes, and data dash attributes are part of HTML5. They're valid attributes, but they require, or there must be some JavaScript that's watching over this. Where is that JavaScript? This JavaScript is right here. These are JavaScript validation files, and they are proprietary to ASP.NET. You will have difficulty in taking these validation files and getting them to validate, say, a PHP app or something like that. It might not be that easy. It may be possible, but it's not easy. So where are these being added? To understand that, we need to go to the layout template. So let's go to view layout.cshtml, and if you go to the bottom, there is a section that gets rendered optionally. You can see here that this declares a section in my layout called scripts, and the required property is false. This is because you don't really want to load this validation JavaScript on every page, because there could be some pages that just have static content. Example, the home page doesn't have any forms. There's nothing to validate there. But on a create form, you need this to be injected. So let's go and look at our create. In our create, if you go to the bottom, this is where this is being injected here, right here. This validation gets injected and it actually watches these fields. Back at the annotations, we can combine them together. For example, if you want to do all of them on one line, you can do this. You can separate this by commas and put min length. Take this out of here and put max length here. So these can be combined and they work the same. Now, even though we don't have an email field here, I'm just going to show you that you also can, if you like, specify the type of data that is accepted in any of these fields. For example, I can, let us say in here the data type for this particular field is data type dot email address. In other words, only email addresses can go here. Of course, this is not what we have. We have a description. But let's see how that works. So I can build, and then let me go back here and refresh. I can enter something like this here for category and for description. If I do not enter something like an email, sure enough, it says, please enter a valid email address. Because this is not realistic, we're going to take that out of here. If you want to combine the minimum length and the maximum length restrictions into one message, there is a way of doing that. For example, I'm going to delete this from here, and I can say, for example, that I want to put the string length into one message. So we'll have a look at this message. This is a new type of annotation, string length. And you give it the maximum length first, followed by an error message, then the minimum length. If you look at this error message, the first placeholder at index 0 is the column name. So this is going to read the description must be between. So placeholder 2 pertains to the minimum length, and placeholder 1 pertains to the maximum length. So this is combining minimum length and maximum length into one error message. So let us run this and see if it's going to work. Refresh. And let us say I enter something here. And for the description, we said that the minimum length should be 6 characters. So let's come back here and enter like 3 characters. Create. And sure enough, we get this custom error message that combines the minimum length and the maximum length together. Let us come up with a regular expression. So that's another type of annotation. Let's come here. I can come and say regular expression, and this is yet another validation. And you can, in brackets, put pattern. And some sort of regular expression. Let us say I want to say the only thing I accept is, let us say A 10 times. a dumb regular expression. Let's see if it works. So we come here, refresh. For description, I'm going to enter something like this, which is more than 10 characters. And it gives me this default error message, which is not really nice. So you can override that by putting in your own error message. So I'm going to come here and disable this because it is somewhat nonsensical. Let's look at something else. I'm going to view the products entity here. And you will notice that this products entity's got a lot of columns. If I come to scaffold this, it's going to scaffold everything for me. But let us say I like scaffolding, I'm interested in it, it saves me time, but I really don't want to scaffold all this stuff. What I'm interested in are these columns. And I don't really need to group them together, it doesn't really matter. But I want to say this needs to be scaffolded, this does not need to be scaffolded. So how can I tell the engine not to scaffold this? Well, there's an annotation for that. And this needs to be resolved. Scaffold column. So I'm going to copy this and add them to all these columns that I don't want scaffolded. And let us scaffold the product entity. See what happens. So I'll come to my controller. Add controller. And choose the same scaffolding template. For here, I'm going to choose products and let it do it for me and see what happens. It's done. Let us add this to the menu system by coming to layout and copying one of these. Come back to our page. Let me click on this to take me to the home page. So here are our products. Let us click on create new, and sure enough, we don't have all these other columns. It wasn't scaffolded for us. But also what's amazing here is that we have drop-down lists for these two foreign keys. It detected the relationships between these two entities, the products and the categories. Now the category is a foreign key in the products entity. Therefore, you get this bonus out of the box that it produces for your drop-down list. If you set up your models properly with the right relationships, this is a bonus. Let's look at something else. How about authorization? Let's register a new user here. I'm going to register a user A at A.A. It's very simple. And a password. Now, it comes up with this thing called apply migrations. This is a topic for another day. But to make a long story short, I'm just going to click on apply migrations and let it do its thing. It says after you apply the migrations, just sort of refresh. Okay. So we applied migrations, and this essentially created the database and the identity A at A.A. What just happened is that a database was created using the application DB context and not the Northwind context. And the database that was created is a local DB database. And the clue really is in the app settings. This is an application DB context, and the database name is called EF Core MVC. So where can we see that? If you click on View, SQL Server Object Explorer, it opens it up here. If you expand local DB, expand databases, and here it is. This is the database that was created for us. Let's have a look at the tables. These are the tables, and most likely my user will be in this entity here. So let me view the data in there. So I can right click and say view data, and this is exactly the user that I created. Let's close this. Now I have created a new user and I'm logged in automatically as that user. Let me log out. Let me give you an overview on how authentication works. Just like validation was by annotation, authorization is by annotation. Let us control the access to specific controllers and also specific action methods using this annotation. Let's go to the categories controller, which is here. If you want to control this categories controller so that only authenticated users have access, then you have to add this authorize annotation, and of course you have to resolve it. So what happens now? Let's refresh our page and go to categories, and we're going to be intercepted. We will be challenged to enter our username and password. If I enter my username and password, I should be able to get to that page. And yes, I can get that page. So let me log out again. Let me show you something else. I can come here and make an exception. Let us say anybody coming into this controller, I'm going to make an exception so that they can only see the index page and nothing else. So I can add an annotation here to say allow anonymous. And this disallows everything except the index action method. Let's see. So if I refresh here and I go to categories, I'm not logged in and I can see the index page. But if I want to create new, I'm going to be challenged. So what we did was, at a controller level, we restricted access to the controller. And at an action method level, we allowed anonymous users. We can mix and match those. For example, instead of doing this at a class level, I can do this, for example, at an action method level. So I'm saying, if you want to create, yes, you have to be authorized. And let's say, if you want to edit, you have to have authorization. Anything else it's open. So if I click on categories, if I want to create, I'm challenged. If I want to edit, I'm challenged. But if I want to look at details, I'm not. And if I want to delete, I'm not. Okay, so you can mix and match. In addition to that, you can also restrict your authorization by roles and by users. So let us reverse this back to what it was before. So I'm saying in this particular case that I'm restricting access at a controller level, but for the index page, that's fine. I can allow access because this is read-only, that's fine. But in addition, I can say roles. So I can say here I would allow roles admin and say member. These could be roles that are set up in our database. Now suppose we want to hide certain elements of our application depending on whether a user has been authenticated or not. For example, when you're logged in, you can't edit and you can't create new. But really, it's a bad idea to show users buttons that they're not allowed to enter or use. It's better not to show to them altogether. So we can actually hide this link here, depending upon whether a user has been authenticated or not. You can do that by going into the view. So let's go to the index page and we want to hide this. You hide this by essentially writing this line of code. And this line of code says, it's Razor syntax, if the user is authenticated, then show this. Not authenticated, tough luck. So we come back here, categories, and we don't see it. It's gone. So you can selectively do these things. Also, you may not even want to show the categories button. If a user is not allowed to check or look at the categories, we shouldn't allow them to see this button altogether. So you might even do this inside of the layout page. Let's do that. So I might come down here and make an exception for this categories button. So basically I'm saying if the user is authenticated, then show them this, otherwise don't show it to them. So because we're not authenticated, we don't see the categories button here. Also, you can do this. Is enroll. If this user is enroll admin, then show this button. Otherwise, don't shoot to them. And that's really more realistic. That if you belong to a certain role, then you can see this. You don't belong to that role, you don't see that, etc., etc. So I think we will not see that at the moment. Not only do I think, I know, because we haven't added this user to an admin role. And sure enough, we don't see that button. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you at another occasion.